Day one of NHL free agency has been absolutely insane. Pretty much every big name has already signed. There has already been over 1.1 billion in total contract dollars given out. There was also a couple of big trades. We have a ton to break down today. For the sake of keeping this video a reasonable length, we're only going to be talking about players who signed with a new team and have a cap hit of at least 3 million. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so let me know down below in the comments, how do you feel your team has done so far in free agency? So with that all being said, let's go ahead and kick things off with the first few signings here. Tyler Bertuzzi has signed a 4-year deal with the Chicago Blackhawks that carries a cap hit of 5.5 million a season. Very reasonable deal in my opinion. It's nice to see Tyler Bertuzzi get some term, and it's also nice to see the Chicago Blackhawks start to go out and get some talent to put around Connor Bedard. I think Bertuzzi will make a fantastic addition to the Blackhawks top 6. He's a hard-working, hard-nosed player who can get you 20 goals in a season. Next up, the Sharks signed Tyler Toffoli to a 4-year deal with a cap hit of 6 million a season. Another young rebuilding team like the Chicago Blackhawks that we are now starting to see go out and add some talent. Toffoli has been one of the NHL's more consistent goal scorers in recent years. He's scored 30 plus now in back-to-back seasons. He's got a great shot. Should help out the San Jose Sharks power play, which could definitely use the help. 6 million a season, especially with the cap going up, I think is more than reasonable for a 30 goal scorer, and being 32 years old, I feel like the 4-year term is perfect. I like this signing for San Jose. The Nashville Predators, who have definitely been the most aggressive team in free agency so far, signed Jonathan Marchessault to a 5-year deal with a cap hit of 5.5 million a season. Feels like a perfectly reasonable contract for Jonathan Marchessault, who's coming off a year in which he scored a career high 42 goals in 82 games. He's been a fantastic playoff performer throughout his career as well. The Nashville Predators are really loading up. Jonathan Marchessault is a big get for them. Next up, the Chicago Blackhawks, who, like Nashville, have definitely been one of the more aggressive teams so far in free agency. They signed Alec Martinez to a 1-year deal with a cap hit of 4 million. 4 million a season is probably a little bit rich for Martinez at this point in his career. He's 37 years old, but it's only a 1-year deal. Chicago needed to hit the cap floor anyway, so it really doesn't matter. Martinez is still a pretty decent defensive defenseman, someone that can kill penalties and should provide a nice veteran presence on Chicago's blue line. Next up, the Calgary Flames have signed Anthony Mantha to a 1-year deal with a cap hit of 3.5 million. I like this signing for Calgary. Mantha is a solid two-way middle six winger who's a 3-time 20-goal scorer, and he's a guy that the Calgary Flames could definitely use as a trade chip at the deadline next season. The New Jersey Devils have signed Brett Pesce to a 6-year deal with a cap hit of 5.5 mil per season. This is a signing that everybody saw coming after the Marino trade at the NHL draft. It was reported that New Jersey were the front runners to land Brett Pesce. I think 5.5 mil a season is more than fair. This is definitely a big-time addition for the New Jersey Devils. A right side of Dougie Hamilton, Brett Pesce, and Simon Nemec sounds pretty nasty. Next up, the Toronto Maple Leafs have signed defenseman Oliver Ekman-Larsson to a 4-year deal with a cap hit of 3.5 mil a season. He played good for the Florida Panthers this season, and in the playoffs, fit really well in their system. Is that going to be the case in Toronto? It's hard to say. I think as long as they don't deploy him in too big of a role, he should do just fine. But I do feel like this contract is a little bit rich and maybe a year or two too long. The Chicago Blackhawks have signed goaltender Laurent Brossoit to a 2-year deal with a cap hit of 3.3 mil a season. Over the last couple of years, Laurent Brossoit has been one of the better backup goaltenders in the NHL. Him and Peter Mrazek should definitely make up a serviceable tandem for Chicago. Next up, the Buffalo Sabres have signed winger Jason Zucker to a 1-year deal with a cap hit of 5 million. I'm a big fan of the 1-year deals. I think Jason Zucker should be a fine replacement for Jeff Skinner in the Buffalo Sabres middle six. This season with Arizona, before being dealt to Nashville, he played in a very limited role. The finishing wasn't really there, but he's a guy who's only 1 year removed from a 27-goal season with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Definitely someone worth taking a chance on a 1-year deal. Next up, Utah has signed a defenseman Ian Cole to a 1-year deal with a cap hit of 3.1 million, so they continue to reshape their blue line. We've already saw them add guys like Mikhail Sergachev and John Marino, and now you can add Ian Cole to that list as well, who is a very solid defensive defenseman, should add some nice depth to Utah's blue line, and on a 1-year deal, you can't really go wrong here. Moving on now, the Seattle Kraken have signed a defenseman Brandon Montour to a 7-year deal with a cap hit of a little over 7.1 mil a season. Definitely a risky signing. Wouldn't be surprised if this contract looks pretty rough in the final few years, but I definitely think the fit makes a lot of sense. Seattle is a team that doesn't get a whole lot of scoring from the back end outside of Vince Dunn. Brandon Montour is definitely going to be able to help with that. Next up, the Chicago Blackhawks have signed Teuvo Teravainen to a 3-year deal with a cap hit of 5.4 mil a season. So Teravainen returns to the team that drafted him, to the team that he won a Stanley Cup with in 2015. In my opinion, this is one of the better contracts that were signed today. $5.4 million for Teravainen is very reasonable, and the 3-year term is perfect for a team like Chicago. Teravainen is coming off of a season in which he scored a career-high 25 goals in 76 games. He's very sound defensively, effective on the penalty kill, and is the kind of player that you can really use in all situations. The Boston Bruins have signed defenseman Nikita Zadorov to a 6-year deal with a cap hit of $5 million a season. Listen, I like Zadorov's game, but this is a lot for a guy who, for the most part throughout his career, has played third pairing minutes. And sure, he's done well in that role. He's solid defensively, obviously a nightmare to play against, and can score some goals. Is a really heavy shot, but based off of the contract that they gave him, you have to imagine Boston plans on using Nikita Zadorov in a larger role than the role he's played throughout the majority of his career. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There's no doubt about it though, this is a pretty big gamble by the Boston Bruins. Next up, the Minnesota Wild have signed forward Yakov Trenin to a 4-year deal with a cap hit of $3.5 million a season. I like Yakov Trenin's game. In my opinion, he's the ideal bottom 6 forward, someone who's versatile, can play center or the wing, forechecks really well, kills penalties, sound 200-foot game. I think this is a nice addition for Minnesota. The Columbus Blue Jackets have signed centerman Sean Monahan to a 5-year deal with a cap hit of $5.5 million a season. Monahan really revived his career in Montreal, was able to build his value back up as to where he was able to land Montreal a first-round draft pick when he was dealt to Winnipeg. He finished this season with 26 goals and 59 points. If he's able to maintain that kind of offensive production, then this contract should be fine, but there is definitely some risk involved here. Columbus is really banking on his offense not drying up like it did his final few years in Calgary, and Monahan's the kind of player where if he's not producing offensively, really isn't all that impactful. He's not overly physical and doesn't have a strong defensive game. Next up, the Edmonton Oilers have signed Victor Arvidsson to a 2-year deal with a cap hit of $4 million. In my opinion, this is one of the better value signings of free agency so far. Obviously, there's concerns about his health. Arvidsson's a guy who has missed a lot of time throughout his career, but when healthy, the guy knows how to put the puck in the net. He's a 5-time 20-plus goal scorer, 2-time 30-goal scorer. Should be a very solid addition to the Edmonton Oilers middle six, and I think they got him at a really good price. Moving on now, the Nashville Predators have signed Steven Stamkos to a 4-year deal with a cap hit of $8 million per season. So the Predators are able to land 2 players in free agency that scored 40 goals this season. They've really bolstered their top 6 today. $8 million a season over the next 4 years is a lot. Stamkos is going to be 38 years old when this contract is over. It'll be interesting to see what Stamkos' goal scoring numbers and offensive production looks like in Nashville without Nikita Kucherov feeding him the puck on the power play. A risky signing for sure. Nashville is really banking on Steven Stamkos' game aging well, but he definitely does make them a better team right now, and clearly based off of the moves Nashville has made today, their goal is to win now. Their other big signing was bringing in Brady Shea on a 7-year deal with a cap hit of $7 million per season. This contract is definitely a lot bigger than what I expected Brady Shea to sign for, but the fit makes a lot of sense. Nashville needed help on the left side after trading Ryan McDonough to Tampa. Brady Shea should fit really well on the Predators' second pairing and on the second power play unit. He's solid defensively and is coming off of a season in which he put up a career-high 47 points in 80 games. Next up, the Boston Bruins have signed Elias Lindholm to a 7-year deal with a cap hit of $7.75 million a season. Another pretty big gamble here by the Bruins. They are definitely banking on Elias Lindholm bouncing back. He had a rough year. He's getting an opportunity to play with a lot of talent around him. He likely slots in as the Boston Bruins' #1 center. If Lindholm is able to regain his form from the 2021-22 season, then this is a massive get for the Boston Bruins. But if not, and he continues to have seasons like the one that he just had, then this is a contract that will likely age very poorly. Next up, the New Jersey Devils have signed defenseman Brendan Dillon to a 3-year deal with a cap hit of $4 million a season. Dillon is extremely physical and very good defensively. I do feel like $4 million a season is a little bit pricey for a guy who likely ends up on their third pairing, but he definitely rounds out their top 6 nicely. When fully healthy, on paper, New Jersey's decor is looking very good. You got Hamilton and Siegenthaler, Pesce and Luke Hughes, and Nemec, and now Brendan Dillon. Continuing on now, next up, the Vancouver Canucks have signed Jake DeBrusk to a 7-year deal with a cap hit of $5.5 million a season. I saw quite a few people on social media criticizing this contract, but I actually really like it. Obviously, the Canucks weren't able to land their main target in Jake Gensel, but you're still getting a really good top 6 forward here in Jake DeBrusk. His finishing might not always be the most consistent, but he's broken the 25 goal mark in a season 3 different times. He plays a strong two-way game. He's effective on both special teams. In my opinion, $5.5 million a season for a player like DeBrusk is more than fair. I feel like the main gripe most people have with this signing is the term being 7 years, but it's not like DeBrusk is 30 years old. He's only 27. He was one of the younger top-tier free agents on the market this year. I really don't envision this being a bad contract contract at all. Next up, the Seattle Kraken have signed centerman Chandler Stevenson to a 7-year deal with a cap of $6.25 million a season. I'm not a fan of this signing at all for the Kraken. That is a lot of money for a long time for a 30-year-old centerman whose career high in points is 65. He's not very good defensively. We already saw his offensive production take a bit of a dip this season with just 51 points in 75 games. Now going to a team like Seattle, he's not going to be playing with Mark Stone anymore. There's going to be a lot less offensive talent around him. Seattle ranked just 29th in the NHL in goals for per game this season. I hope I end up being wrong, but I really believe this contract has the potential to be very bad. Next up, the Washington Capitals have signed defenseman Matt Roy to a 7-year contract with a cap of $5.75 million a season. So the Capitals continue to make big moves this offseason. We already saw them trade for Dubois and Mangiapane. They also made another pretty big trade today that I'll talk about at the end of this video. And they also land one of the best defensemen on the free agent market in Matt Roy. Roy has been phenomenal for the LA Kings over the last few seasons. Elite defensively, great on the penalty kill. Not a guy who's going to put up a ton of points or be featured on the power play, but his offensive analytics at even strength are very good. This is a big get for the Capitals. They've really improved their blue line today. Next up, the Dallas Stars signed Matt Dumba to a 2-year deal worth $3.75 million a season. Not a big fan of this signing at all for Dallas. I think this is a lot of money for a guy who's struggled for a while now, especially this past season. He is a right shot defenseman, and they do tend to get overpaid in free agency, but even still, I was pretty surprised when I saw this signing. The Dallas Stars also signed another right shot defenseman, Ilya Lyubushkin. They gave him a 2-year deal with a cap of $3.25 million, and again, I'm not a big fan of this signing either. Lyubushkin is a depth defenseman, and outside of his physicality and his ability to clear the front of the net, he doesn't really bring a whole lot to the table. Next up, the New York Islanders have signed Anthony Duclair to a 4-year deal with a cap of $3.5 million. I think this is a fantastic signing for the Islanders, a team that has been looking for a top-line winger to play with Bo Horvat and Matt Barzal. There's been rumors about them potentially going after somebody like Nikolai Ehlers, but I honestly think Anthony Duclair could be a good fit in that spot. He's a fast winger who's lethal off the rush, had 24 goals this season between the Sharks and Lightning. Pairing him with a fast, crafty playmaker like Matt Barzal could be a match made in heaven. I really believe this signing has the potential to be a steal for the Islanders. Next up, the Ottawa Senators have signed David Perron to a 2-year deal with a cap hit of $4 million. His game definitely fell off quite a bit this season in Detroit, and now at 36 years old, I think it's reasonable to assume that's going to continue. But with this only being a 2-year deal, I don't really ever see it becoming a problem for Ottawa. Perron's definitely still a pretty useful player, a guy you should still be able to pencil in for 15 or so goals. He has a physical element to his game as well. Should be a decent addition to the Senators' middle six. Next up, the Toronto Maple Leafs have signed Chris Tanev to a 6-year deal with a cap hit of $4.5 million after trading for his rights. 6 years is definitely pretty long for a 34-year-old defenseman. This contract has LTIR written all over it for the final few years, but there's no doubt that Chris Tanev is definitely going to help the Toronto Maple Leafs tremendously in the short term. He is one of the best defensive defensemen, one of the best shutdown guys in the entire league. Next up, the LA Kings have signed forward Warren Foegele to a 3-year deal with a cap hit of $3.5 million a season. I like this signing for the Kings. He should be a really nice addition to their bottom six. Foegele was similar to someone like Daniel Sprong this season in the sense that he produced offense very efficiently, career highs across the board with 20 goals and 41 points, despite only playing 4th-line minutes and not getting a ton of opportunities on the power play. That being said, he definitely has a much more well-rounded game than someone like Daniel Sprong. Really good forechecker, solid defensively. The Kings got pretty good value here in my opinion. Moving on now to the next signing, the LA Kings brought in defenseman Joel Edmondson on a 4-year deal with a cap hit of $3.85 million. I like the Foegele signing for the Kings, but I really don't like this Edmondson signing for them. Joel Edmondson is a physical third-pairing defenseman who doesn't bring much to the table in terms of offensive production, and his defensive analytics aren't good either. To me, this is very similar to when Columbus gave Eric Gudbranson a 4-year deal last offseason. I really just don't understand the thought process here for the Kings giving Edmondson a 4-year deal. Moving on now to our last few signings we have to talk about in this video. The San Jose Sharks have signed centerman Alexander Wenberg to a 2-year deal with a cap hit of $5 million. This is a fine signing, in my opinion, for the Sharks. Wenberg's a guy who can help them be a little bit more competitive next season. He's really good defensively. His playmaking ability should help with the power play as well, and he's also a guy that the Sharks could definitely use as a trade chip in the final year of this deal. Next up, the Carolina Hurricanes have signed defenseman Shane Gostisbehere to a 3-year deal with a cap hit of just $3.2 million. Pretty surprised by this. I definitely thought Gostisbehere's cap hit was going to come in much higher than $3.2 million, considering he's coming off of a year in which he scored 56 points, the second highest point total he's finished a season with in his entire career. He's a player the Hurricanes are familiar with. They traded for him at the deadline in 2023, and he played pretty well for them down the stretch that season. Really good value here for the Hurricanes in my opinion, and they also made another signing at around the same time that I think is pretty good value for them as well. Sean Walker, 5-year deal with a cap hit of $3.6 million a season. So after losing the likes of Brady Shea and Brett Pesce, the Hurricanes are able to replenish their blue line a little bit here with Gostisbehere and Walker at a combined cap hit of just $6.8 million. I like Walker's game a lot. He's a fantastic skater, good at generating offense at 5-on-5, and he's very good on the penalty kill as well. Next up, the Edmonton Oilers brought in Jeff Skinner on a 1-year deal with a cap hit of just $3 million after Skinner was bought out by the Buffalo Sabres. This is a fantastic signing in my opinion for the Edmonton Oilers, a low risk, high reward move. Sure, Skinner was definitely overpaid at $8 million a season, but this is a guy who knows how to fill the net, 30 or more goals in 2 out of the last 3 seasons. I think the Oilers did a fantastic job so far in free agency to add some secondary scoring for very cheap. Skinner and Victor Arvidsson had a combined cap hit of $7 million. That's good value for the Oilers. I would not be surprised at all if those guys are able to combine for 50 goals for the Oilers next season if healthy. And now finally, the last signing we're going to talk about today, TJ Brodie signs a 2-year deal with the Blackhawks, a cap hit of $3.75 million per season. Brodie is a solid second pairing D-man who's sound defensively, blocks shots, and is another guy that helps the Blackhawks hit the cap floor, get a little bit more competitive, and can be used as a trade chip somewhere down the line. Before I get out of here, I do want to give you guys my quick thoughts on the couple of trades that took place today. First up, the Washington Capitals have acquired defenseman Jacob Chychrun from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Nick Jensen and a 3rd rounder in 2026. Honestly, pretty surprised that this is all Ottawa was able to get for Jacob Chychrun. It's a crappy situation for Ottawa. It's yet another scenario where they went out and traded premium assets for a player who they then had to trade away because it didn't sound like that player was going to extend with them, and the return they ended up getting was not near the same value as what they gave up in the first place. We saw it with DeBrincat, now we see it again here with Jacob Chychrun. I will say I do believe Nick Jensen is going to be a good add for the Senators. He fills their need of a top 4 right shot defenseman. He's solid defensively, good skater, but just from a value standpoint, I can definitely understand why Senators fans are underwhelmed by this return. And when it comes to this deal from the point of view of the Capitals, they're continuing to load up and continuing to try and build off of their playoff berth from this season. On paper, their top 4 is looking very good. You got John Carlson and Matt Roy, Rasmus Sandin, and Jacob Chychrun. Even if Chychrun just ends up being a 1-year rental for the Capitals and he leaves as a UFA next summer, I still think this is well worth it for the Washington Capitals, who are clearly going for it next season, and it's not like they had to give up premium assets here in terms of a 1st-round draft pick or a top prospect. And hey, if it's a good fit and Chychrun plays well in Washington and likes it there and signs an extension, then even better. Now moving on to the other trade that took place today, Riley Smith has been dealt to the New York Rangers. The Penguins are retaining 25% of Smith's salary. In exchange, the Penguins will receive a 2020 second and a 2025 fifth. The Rangers have been pretty quiet in free agency, but they're able to get some help on the wing here in Riley Smith, who's just a pretty solid all-around middle 6 winger. Only scored 13 goals this season with the Penguins, so the finishing really wasn't there, but he's a guy who's scored 20 or more in a season 5 times. He's only 1 year removed from scoring 26 goals with the Vegas Golden Knights in 2022-23, which was a career high. Decent addition for the Rangers, and with Pittsburgh retaining salary, his cap hit with New York is just $3.75 million, which is definitely a lot less than if they were to go out and try to sign a top 6 winger in unrestricted free agency. So that is going to wrap up today's video, breaking down all the major signings from free agency so far and the couple of trades that we saw today. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so let me know down below in the comments, how do you think your team has done so far in free agency? And if you're a fan of any of the 4 teams that were involved in the 2 trades that we just talked about, let me know how you feel about those moves down below in the comments as well. If you made it all the way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave the video a like. That is definitely the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all again soon.